Fyodor Dostoevsky's life was a confession on the page. I am a sick man. I am a wicked man. An unattractive man. This bleak self-diagnosis from Notes from Underground sets the tone for a worldview carved out of suffering and existential torment. After surviving a mock execution and years in Siberian exile, his naive, hopeful romanticism disappeared. The cold irony of that punishment forged a conviction. No political scheme or rational theory could purify human nature. As Dostoevsky later wrote, "Evil lies deeper in human beings than our social physicians suppose, that no social structure will eliminate evil. The laws of the human soul are still so little known, that there are not and cannot be final judges except God himself." In this crucible of faith and doubt, Dostoevsky's novels trace a recurring geography of the soul, an inescapable freedom, an unquiet conscience, a God who is mysteriously silent amid suffering, and an ever-present division within the human heart. Freedom and the unyielding will. Dostoevsky's philosophy places absolute freedom at the center of human existence, but he regards it not as a carefree blessing, but a daunting curse. He openly defies any system that would tame the will. In Notes from Underground, the narrator rails against the idea that human behavior can be reduced to rational laws. In a famous outburst, he asks, "Good heavens, gentlemen, what sort of free will is left, when it will all be a case of twice two make four? Twice two makes four without my will." As if free will meant that. No mechanical formula, no laboratory of social engineering can capture Dostoevsky's human freedom. He insists that man will often act irrationally or perversely just to prove he is free. In his words, what man wants is simply independent choice, whatever that independence may cost, and wherever it may lead. Unpredictable will. Freedom, for Dostoevsky, is the power to defy logic. His underground man gleefully imagines kicking society's prudence to dust simply to satisfy a rebellious caprice. In this light, any attempt to enslave human action to arithmetics or social formulas is an affront. Real life cannot be reduced to a textbook equation. Choice and responsibility. Yet this boundless freedom comes with a cost. Each person can freely choose between good and evil in their hearts, but such freedom always carries weight. Every choice is moral choice. Dostoevsky, via scholar Reinhard Laut's summary, notes, "This freedom is both a source of joy for individuals and a burden and pain. Only a strong will can bear it. The weak seek comfort by submitting to rigid social codes instead of their own conscience." In sum, Dostoevsky's human is an agent of radical freedom. He recognizes that reason can only define so much. Reason is a good thing, his underground man acknowledges, but reason is ultimately just reason. It can only satisfy man's intellectual capabilities, but will is the manifestation of the entire life, the entire human existence. In other words, human life far exceeds any neat calculation. What can reason know? Reason only knows what it can know, whereas human nature operates in its entirety, both consciously and unconsciously. Even when lying, it is still life. Freedom, then, is the heart's privilege to live outside the arithmetic of the world. It may lead a man to folly or even ruin, but without it man is no better than a mere organ stop in an organ pipe, no more than a machine playing its pre-written tune. Dostoevsky's universe favors the tragic grandeur of free humanity over the comfort of deterministic security. The burden of moral choice and guilt. With freedom comes an inescapable moral burden. In Dostoevsky's vision, conscience is the eternal judge, and guilt is the inevitable punishment for transgression. No legal sentence can compare to the torture of an accusing soul. As Porphyry, the investigator in Crime and Punishment, puts it plainly, if he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake. That will be his punishment, as well as the prison. In Dostoevsky's moral economy, conscience outstrips courts. One may enter prison, but true guilt does its work from inside. Raskolnikov himself learns this. His crime haunts him even before he is ever arrested. conscience as judge. Dostoevsky repeatedly shows that an awakened conscience is more merciless than any czar. The hero of Crime and Punishment confesses he killed not only 2 women, but his own soul. He is a criminal with the soul of a saint, in his own words. Even in his dreams, he hears his own heart's condemnation. Dostoevsky suggests that real punishment for wrongdoing begins within the sufferer's conscience. Inescapable suffering. He also believed that deep feeling entails deep pain. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov muses that pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. The really great men must, I think, have great sadness on earth. The genius or the martyr cannot avoid suffering. In fact, their capacity for insight and compassion makes their suffering heavier. Dostoevsky treated suffering not as mere punishment, but as the fire that forges depth in the soul. Dostoevsky goes further. Conscience itself can become an addiction to suffering. One character notes that even when everything logical suggests he should be happy, he finds perversity more pleasant. He clings to guilt and guilt's gravity as a sort of last truth in a world of illusions. Conscience, redemption, and the divine. The extremity of conscience ties into Dostoevsky's vision of redemption and the divine. He saw suffering as the place where the human seeks God's face, but often hears only silence. In the brothers Karamazov, the ecstasy of self-sacrificing love, embodied by the saintly Alyosha, is set against the bleak rebellion of Ivan. Ivan asks how one can keep faith if innocent children suffer. He eventually turns in rage. "I respectfully return my ticket." He means that if paradise requires such a price, he chooses to reject it outright. Freedom of conscience. This tragic choice echoes a famous line. Nothing is more seductive for man than his freedom of conscience, but nothing is a greater cause of suffering. In Dostoevsky's theology, the same conscience that makes a man noble also makes him despair. Belief becomes both a salvation and a torment. Silence of God. In the climactic Grand Inquisitor chapter, Christ offers no argument to explain evil. He only gives a silent kiss. Dostoevsky interprets that the only answer to humanity's crimes and pain is love made flesh, not logical proof. God's refusal to speak underlines his mysteriousness. As Dostoevsky frames it, heaven says nothing to justify the cross or the orphan's cry. Dostoevsky's heroes often reach faith through suffering. The prostitute Sonia of Crime and Punishment begs Raskolnikov to kiss the cross, don't have doubt, because for her, faith persists in the crucible of agony. Ultimately, God's silence is the space where the soul must project its own hope. Dostoevsky does not provide easy resolutions. He portrays faith as something one clings to in spite of the silence, rather than because of comforting answers. The divided soul. Underlying all these themes is the division within the human soul. Dostoevsky's philosophical voice is polyphonic. Multiple warring truths echo through his pages. He anticipated the idea that reason, conscience, and the irrational psyche would clash within every man. As one scholar notes, from Dostoevsky onward, an intense confrontation emerged between those realms. The demands of the heart and unconscious instincts began to surface, clashing with reason and conscience. Conflict of self. In novel after novel, Dostoevsky paints characters who are split. They pursue virtuous ideals but find themselves drawn into perversity. Raskolnikov imagines himself an extraordinary man who can transgress moral law, yet his hidden conscience undermines that fantasy at every turn. Ivan Karamazov preaches God's justice, yet his own secret doubt devolves into rage. The underground man acknowledges both his self-loathing and a perverse pride. He confesses quietly, "I was a sick man, a wicked man," and yet insists on asserting his freedom anyway. Dostoevsky's duality. Russian philosopher Lev Shestov put it starkly. Dostoevsky's thoughts wandered through the wilderness of his own soul. These guiltless criminals, these blameless consciences, constitute the content of Dostoevsky's many novels. This is his true self, the reality, the real life. In other words, every character's hell or grace reflects Dostoevsky's own inner landscape. There are no simple heroes or villains. Each person harbors two Dostoevskys within, the whisper of faith and the scream of doubt, the will to live and the urge to chaos. In this divided cosmos, traditional moral absolutes are called into question. Dostoevsky shows that when a man transgresses, two consciences may inhabit him at once. One bound by law that demands confession, the other proud and unrepentant. His insight was that mankind cannot be reduced to good or evil. Both extremes dwell in every heart. The greatest drama of his philosophy is that each individual must navigate this inner schism alone. Poetic darkness and moral vision. Dostoevsky's own philosophical teachings are seldom spelled out in dry essays. Instead, he pours them into the blood and shadows of his fiction, where symbols and parables carry the meaning. Yet some constants appear in his letters and diary sketches. He preached active, self-sacrificial love as the ultimate meaning, always aware that such love itself cost suffering. He repeated that conscience is God's secret court inside us, that freedom without morality leads to despair, and that even if man curses God and life, his soul nevertheless craves redemption. Throughout his writing, his tone is relentlessly introspective and often grotesquely vivid. He is a poet of pain. From the muffled agony of Raskolnikov's confession cell to the public spectacle of Alyosha's weeping at his teacher's deathbed, Dostoevsky's language swims in imagery of affliction and illumination. His narrator might speak of inner hells, icy deserts of the soul, or the wound of a wounded conscience. Yet always there is a strange beauty in his darkness, a sense that through night's agony, one may glimpse even a sliver of grace. His style in fragments could fit a video essay monologue. Man's soul is a cathedral with two bell towers, one tolling for heaven, one crashing for hell. We stride inside, hearing both at once, though in reality, these truths live hidden in prose. For example, the underground man observes, half joking, half terrified, that human pride means that even if logic decreed he should live comfortably, he would storm off in some other path, just as mindlessly, even to meet danger. This paradoxical view, that freedom is more precious than comfort, that pride alone may drive a man to ruin, is quintessentially Dostoevskian. Key Dostoevskian convictions might be summarized as evil in the soul. No social theory can eradicate evil, for Dostoevsky taught that the human soul will remain as it always has been. In each of us lies a depth where darkness dwells, regardless of external conditions. Sacred freedom. Humans will choose against their advantage to exercise free will, even if it means kicking the cosmic equation to dust. Freedom is a necessary torment and delight of life. Conscience as punishment. A guilty conscience inexorably punishes the sinner from within. True guilt is not the judge and jury outside us, but the sleepless soul within. Suffering as crucible. Great intelligence or a deep heart must taste suffering. Pain is not a mistake in the narrative, but the very forge that shapes compassion and faith. God's silent answer. When human logic fails to reconcile good and evil, Dostoevsky often points to God's silence, a kiss instead of argument. Faith in his vision ultimately rests on an unconditional love that endures in spite of unanswered questions. Divided existence. Every person is inherently split. The demands of reason and morals forever clash with the hidden cries of the instinctual soul. Life's work is to walk between these forces without surrendering entirely to either. In weaving these ideas, Dostoevsky teaches that to be human is to carry contradiction. Freedom invites suffering. Conscience brings anguish. Love emerges from the same dark soil as despair. He never resolves the central paradox, how to reconcile God's goodness with life's cruelty. Instead, he insists we stay in the question. In the end, it is the journey of questioning and seeking that counts. His monologues speak to us in midnight whispers, that every soul must bear the weight of choice, that salvation may be found in loving even in their sin, to borrow a famous Karamazov line, and that the final judge of our souls is love itself, love stubborn and silent even when heaven seems to have answered nothing. So this is where we end, not with resolution, not with salvation, but with the quiet truth Dostoevsky whispered through every page: that man is free, terrifyingly free, free to love, free to betray, free to kneel, or to walk into the abyss and call it home. And the devil? He does not force your hand. He waits. He waits in the moment you say, "I am beyond good and evil." In the moment you feel justified, untouchable, alone. That's where he lives. And if you've listened this far, perhaps it's because you've heard him too. Maybe in your silence, in your anger, in the reasons you gave yourself when no one else was watching. And yet, the fact that you're still here, listening, breathing, means something in you still fights. Something in you still believes that you are not yet lost. So let the war rage. Let the conscience scream. Let the silence surround you. Because in that agony, in that sacred fracture, you are most human. And if there is any redemption at all, it begins there, in the moment you dare to look inward and say, "Yes, I know the devil. He lives inside me, but he is not all of me." This was Neuromystique. And if your soul still trembles, let it. The war within is not your curse. It is your proof that you are still alive.